potential friends and adventurers. I'm Em, and today we're going to talk about how to easily track time and resources. Welcome to the DM table. Well, how to successfully track time and resources without having so much bookkeeping, because we all want less bookkeeping, players want less bookkeeping, DMs want less bookkeeping, especially DMs because you want to be DMing, not bookkeeping, and yet we might want some of these things. We might want to track time and money and other resources because we need it for our campaign to be realistically set so that we can manage those resources, have players play with them, and so on and so forth. And keeping note specifically of each individual coin on each individual party member is, well, it's not the most glorious job, even if the players have to do it, and assigning gold and giving it based on number of party members, having exact numbers calculated for each person, that's a big job we don't actually have to do. So what do we do instead? Well, firstly, for the wealth, as in spending money that people have with them, you can sort of, every time they have it, when they get it, when they start with it, when they get it as a reward, you can sort of just sum it up and deal it out. You can sum it up for the whole party. You can say, well, you get rewarded in the equivalent of 30 nights spent at an inn, and well, they can imagine how much that is. Or if they don't, still, you'll be able to tell them each time, well, the cart costs this much, so you've had that much and now you have this much left. You don't have to keep track who has what, just ask and there you go. Keep track of the total in general. Make a note every time you assign something or remember it, and then once they've spent it, no matter who has spent it, the others won't be able to, so in case somebody either forgets or tries to be a little cheeky, you will know. This is a good method to track resources because you can keep a more closer eye on how they fit into the narrative. For example, a bundle of torches is a good enough description, and yet you know more precisely when the time comes whether this is 6 torches or 10 torches or even 12 torches, but they can be indeed 6 or 5 if you need to cut down on them soon or something like that. In any case, if the players ask how many torches, you can tell them, trying to guess your best, but players frequently won't ask all of such things, and you will be able to have better control of the resources, and that'll make it easier to track. Also, even if they do ask, you can make a note, but then you don't have to keep track of every single torch that's expanded, because you can say you're using your torches as you go along the dungeon. And at one point you can say, well, over so and so you have spent 3 torches in total. So when it comes up, when it's of narrative value, when you want to progress those resources, you have a method of doing so, because you're tracking how they're supposed to flow rather than trying to preset their value in such a manner that you guess the exact amount, you guess the exact duration, you guess how that stacks together mathematically, and then they're supposed to last together exactly how much you want to know. This way you can exactly fit to your story the duration of resources, both individually and in general, globally. So yeah, that's why it's good to do it like that, and I frequently do that like that, even if I have set the prices of the world very precisely otherwise. For example, because sometimes I do keep track of money individually, because other way to keep track of money is to make prices very relatable. Now, some people might find this, well, less immersive for some reason. I don't know why, because those could be the prices. They are very realistic, because how you get them is you copy them from here. You essentially equivalize with whatever dollar or euro or whatever your currency is of things that they buy and their equivalents. You will know how much a meal maybe should cost, you know how much a high-class meal should cost, you know how much a ride should cost, you will sort of know how much an important piece of equipment costs. You can even compare computer parts with swords or something like that. It essentially won't matter as long as you have a good grasp of what is spent and how this fits into the budget of the players and their characters. Because once you know how it plays out, you can assign appropriate to the story the amounts that they will be receiving and spending. And so you won't need the previous method, but the previous method is still good whenever you want to have it a little bit more vague and when you want to do more precise control over these resources. Also, you can track time pretty easily. People ask how to track time, but I don't think I've heard this advice yet, and I've been doing it since the beginning like this. Just announce what time it is at the beginning by description. You don't have to place it extremely prominent. You just say it's noon and you're going towards the tavern, so it's noon. Now remember this, and then you can build a sequence. And when you have built a sequence, you will know how the time has passed. You'll know where they spent 15 minutes, because you'll imagine it like that. You'll know where they spent half an hour. Just keep sort of describing it to yourself and to them whenever it's of importance, like saying, you've spent so and so, and now there's 15 minutes left to the meeting, and so that's what the time is. You can say exactly what time it is because you can add it. You can even give a few minutes here and there for transitions, for things in between that spend time that nobody pays attention to. And once you form this, you can sort of describe time here and there. And once people ask you why is it that much, you can tell them, well, you spent 15 minutes here, half an hour here, hour and a half here, and well, once you've done that, that's it. That's really the description of the timeline. And since you've kept sequence internally, and mind you don't need to mark this down anywhere unless you're gonna be making a big break from the campaign and it's in the middle of something and you won't remember what was the last time when things stopped. Because usually when I finish a session, I make note of time mentally with my players. We exchange a few words, like saying, well, we stopped here, we did this, it's so and so, such and such time, and the last thing that happened is this and this, and we're waiting for the next move of so and so. And once we know all this, we'll remember it, and when we get together again, we can ask, well, what was the last thing that we were doing and how did it look? And then we can redescribe it to each other, both players to me and I to the players, and then we'll get into the sequence again. So that's how I track time, and I highly suggest it, I suppose. In that manner, you can therefore track the weather as well, when you have it planned for the campaign. And it's important because you're not supposed to track all of the weather all of the time, you're just supposed to sometimes when it's relevant, mention it. And sometimes for variety, but you don't need to track it most precisely. You just sort of go along and say, and the rain starts up. Then you say later, after a few hours, and the rain lets up and stops. And so on and so forth. And you don't have to keep track of it, you don't have to note it down, and only when you have something campaign or quest relevance related, you can note it ahead of time and have a note about, well, on that and that day, in that and that hour, such and such weather happens, and this will relate to this and this. You don't even have to have such a long note, I certainly don't. I just write down the weather and a couple of words about why it's there, for example, and that's where the monsters start appearing, or something like that. And that's it. That's how you keep track of time and weather. But you can also track other things like this. Things like the ones that players own, that they have, that they could turn into other things like houses and, well, essentially money that isn't money yet. Other resources, also favors and investments. Remember that they could get rewarded in many ways, and these ways can all create their own pockets of resources, resource pools, if you will, and you can track any such thing for variety when you want, and people certainly do get, especially adventurers, to have somebody owe them a favor or two, and maybe they can rely on this as a resource if you want the kind of game that tracks resources a lot. And there you go, you have various resources that you can track like this. It's easier to do it even in parallel, and you can keep each sort of resource marked down at where it was last, at how much was left, and so on. Even if they say have a mine that is producing some ore, you can keep track of the mine with one sort of sentence which says at the end of each session at most. Even if it's a mine-centric campaign heavily, you can mark it down and say how much the mine has produced in general, versus another day, versus another month, versus something that was bought or sold, versus something else, like discovery of a new vein or depletion of an old one. And that's only if you're even having something like that, because you don't have to have something like that. These are all sort of options that you will, by need, install into your campaign per se. Otherwise, you won't track anything that you don't have need of tracking. And that's how you track all these resources. Also, if you're willing, and usually I am, and if your simulationist enough, and I guess I am, you can keep track of encumbrance in the same way, and that is how much people are carrying. You don't want them to carry 30 swords on themselves of large size and so on and so forth. I guess they could if they have something like a golf bag and are strong, but if you see what I mean, you want to visualize. You should visualize what each person is carrying, but this would be tiresome if you did it all the time for all of the people that you're DMing to. So what you do is you occasionally check when things are important, like crossing a log bridge, or swimming, or climbing a rope, or jumping off a cliff, or climbing up a cliff, or climbing up the ladder, or passing a creaky bridge, or something like that. You then sort of ask the players to describe to you what they're carrying where, and visualize and see whether this is logical and how hard these things will be. Otherwise, you don't have to pay attention to encumbrance in any case where it wouldn't come into play. You check when they pick up something heavy, like full equipment off of another adventure that wasn't so lucky, and something like that happens, you check encumbrance, you check whether they can move, who's carrying what, and you don't have to keep track of this further. You don't have to write it down, you don't have to do anything about it except check the whole party when you think somebody couldn't move unless they have divided things properly. And this will teach players to divide things properly, and you won't have to worry. I use this method and I barely need to check once every, I don't know, 3 months or so. It's rarely coming into play anymore because encumbrance exists and is perfectly played without me needing to be too perfectly concentrated on it, because it assumes natural order of things. So there we go, encumbrance as well. Well, adventure, if you thought this was unique, maybe you could spare a click. Thank you already for watching. I would love to see you here every week, and would love to talk to you in the comments and see what you thought and how your campaigns went. Bye.